This is a companion tutorial video for the penny doll pattern available on the Blue Whimsy Etsy shop. Okay, so the doll is stuffed. I finished the seam down the back, and so our doll is, the actual doll is complete. What we want to do now is we want to give her some ribbons on her ponytails. And so you can do this by hand. So I just cut a piece of ribbon about this long, and I take 2 loops and just tie a bow using the 2 loops, and then get the loops to about the right length, tighten it up. And then what I do is I just snip the edges or the ends of that bow at a diagonal. Now, to keep the ribbon from fraying, there's something you can buy, fray check, that you can get, I think, at pretty much any fabric store. And you just dab a little bit on the edges of the bow. And it just dries and it just kind of keeps it from fraying, which is nice. Your ribbons will stay looking nicer for longer. Okay, so I'll just let that one dry. This one I've done already. So what I'm going to do is just take this ribbon and just hand stitch it to the ponytail just at the base. Now you could use white thread or you can use brown thread if you want to if you want to make it match the ponytail. It doesn't actually matter because it will be mostly hidden behind the bow anyway. So that side looks a little bit nicer. I'll use that side as the outside. Just hook this through. And then just do a couple more stitches loosely and then pull it tight so it's tacked on. Okay, once you've done a couple of stitches to tack it on, again, like we did when we embroidered the face, I would just loop it through again, just do a stitch to loop it through, create a loop. And then when you pull it through, you've got your loop. Get tangled in the bow there. So you've got your loop, and you'll just put your needle through again from the front once, and again a second time, and then when you pull it tight, making sure the bow doesn't get tangled in there, it should create a knot just at the base of that bow. So you've got one bow finished. And then do the same thing with the other side. We're ready now to do the clothes. So we have the piece for the skirt, we have the 2 pieces for the shoulder wrap, 2 of those pieces, and we also have the 2 pieces for the shoes. I've also cut an 2 8-inch pieces of ribbon and cut diagonal ends and also finished them with the fray check, just like I did for the ribbons for the ponytails, just to keep the ribbon nice. So we're going to do the shoes first. We're going to take the ribbon and just fold it in half so that we can find the middle of the ribbon. And I just usually fold it and crease it a little bit, and so I know where to align it on the shoes. So for the shoes, you want to align the ribbon so that the middle of it is the middle of the top of the shoe. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch along there, maybe 1 stitch along the top of the ribbon, 1 along the bottom of the ribbon, just to secure it to the back of the shoe. I've switched my thread to red thread because the rest of my fabric will go with red thread. You could choose whatever color you want, or if you wanted to just stick with white, I'm sure that would be fine too, depending on the color of your fabric. Okay, so that's along the top of that ribbon. And then I'll do 1 more along the bottom as well, just to secure it so it doesn't flip. Once you've trimmed the threads, you can go ahead and with the ribbon side in, because this is the right side of your fabric, you're going to fold that so that the ribbon is on the inside of the shoe. And I usually don't bother pinning this, I would just hold it and I'm going to stitch around till I get to the folded edge here and then finish it up along that folded edge. So make sure you keep the ribbon out of the way when you're sewing. I usually start just a little bit in from 1/4 inch here, just to give that little extra hold on the top of the shoe. So just a little bit of a curve up at the top. And then just adjust. And again, because it is a curve, I usually sew a few stitches and then raise the presser foot again to adjust the direction. Now once I get to the folded edge, I just want to taper that seam off. And you can see when I take it out, I've just kind of sewed along to the edge and it almost just curves right into that edge of the shoe. So before I turn the shoe right side out, I usually trim just a little triangle off the corner here so that doesn't show when the shoe is right side out. And I also take off any excess felt. It's more difficult to sew a very narrow seam allowance, and so I sew a bit of a wider seam allowance and then trim the extra off at the end. At this point you're ready to turn it right side out. And there you have your shoe. And you'll put the shoe on her foot. Fits quite nicely. And to finish off the ribbon, tie a bow. Okay, so our doll has her shoes. Next we're going to make the shoulder wrap. So we cut the 2 shoulder wrap pieces earlier. Now we're going to place them right sides together and line them up right sides together. And what we're going to want to do is on our shoulder wrap pattern, we want to make sure we leave, or when we sew it, we want to make sure we leave just a gap of about a couple of inches somewhere in the middle at the back. And so I usually just kind of estimate about a 2-inch gap there, so I'll start sewing here, go all the way around, and then finish it off just 2 inches before the end. You can pin this if you want. I find that because they're the same size and the fabric's a little grippy, it does stick together quite nicely, so I don't usually pin this. Okay, so starting again just a little past the center, I'll use leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So here, I'd want to finish the seam about over here, so I have that gap to turn it right side out. So just as a little tip, this is not in the pattern, but as a tip just for turning this right side out, it is kind of helpful to snip the edge. Don't snip your seam, but snip the edge fairly tiny at the corners there, so that when you turn it inside out there's not a lot of fabric that has to be fitting into that end. You could even trim a little bit further down, just narrow it a bit further. Okay, so I'm going to turn this right side out. And again, the use of a chopstick can be helpful to help with that end, as long as you're gentle, because you don't want to poke right through the end of the fabric. And sometimes that last little bit, you can pull it out with a pin a little bit, you can keep pushing with a chopstick, or you can work on turning that out with a pin. And then what we'll do is after we've got that turned, we'll go to the ironing board and make sure that's pressed nicely. So when I do that, I usually use my chopstick to help press all the way around the outside, just to keep the seams totally turned, and then I'll iron that down so that it's a nice edge. And then we'll come back and we'll sew around the edge of that. To do that last finishing seam, you want to be about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge and start at the top, back, middle, and then just sew a nice 1/8 of an inch seam all the way around the edge to finish that off. And there you have your shoulder wrap.